Monday, September 13th, 1971. At the corner of Baker and Marylebone Streets in Westminster, London, the branch manager of Lloyd's Bank opened the vault at 10 in the morning, as usual. As the huge door swung away, what he saw left him speechless. Chunks of concrete, wrecked safe deposit boxes, jewelry, and more compromising items were strewn across the floor. Was it really possible that criminals were able to break into a vault with thousands of tons of protection? Or were other elements at work?
I'm Jeff Moss.
I'm Tim Coleman.
And I'm Tyler J. Thomas. Together we will explore and discuss these events from the perspective of over 30 years of combined locksmith and door hardware experience. This is the Three Tumblers.
Now, the Baker Street bank heist.
The early 1970s in London have been described as the hangover from the 60s. Jobs were in short supply, and the media was focusing its attention on people in high society. With all the rich people being highlighted every day, it was easy for the common person to feel discouraged. In the 1970s, London was depressing. It was a reflection on what was happening globally, where there were very high unemployment rates, very low available jobs that people could get, and society reflected that. You see it in the television and movies. It was just gritty and dark and just not really happy. Just a very dreary time for London and the rest of the world. So when you have people like Anthony Gavin out there searching for a job, they look to less than legal means to obtain income. Lloyd's Bank got its start 206 years earlier when iron producer and dealer Samson Lloyd started the first bank in Dale End, Birmingham. Since its start, it catered to high-end customers with large balances and the country's elite. With its trademark green print and black horses, Lloyd's is still an icon of British banking today.
They sure are. 436 billion in total assets, 45,000 plus employees as of just a few years ago. So to put this into American comparisons, those numbers are slightly less than what we have with PNC Bank in America. PNC has slightly more assets and employees, but Lloyd's isn't far behind. Private banks began in Great Britain in the late 17th century, so Lloyd's has been in the game from almost the start. Private banks initially started to manage the assets of groups like members of the royal family, nobility, and the landed gentry. For all intents and purposes, most of modern banking was invented, if you want to call it that, around this time. Things like checks, limited liability investments, overdraft protections, that all starts around this time. And Lloyd's was in the right place at the right time when they got their start because Birmingham was the powerhouse of the Industrial Revolution. They called it the workshop of the world, and Lloyd's was able to finance a lot of the trade and industry around the town at the time. And to kind of grossly oversimplify things, they were able to take this solid and lucrative beginning and run with it until, they're still running with it right now. So it was a good base to get started with, and they've maintained it ever since.
39-year-old Anthony Gavin was a former PT instructor for the British Army and had a forceful and threatening personality. He saw Lloyd's as being a prime target and soon recruited Reg Tucker as an inside man, Mickey "Skinny" Gervais as an alarms expert, Thomas Stevens as an equipment guy, and Bobby Mills as the lookout. He also hired two others, known only as Little Legs and TH.
Yeah, so as many of you know, I like to watch Mission Impossible, and one of the opening scenes is where Jim is selecting all the people that are going to be on the mission. And this sort of reminds me of that. We have a guy for each each part of the job. Everybody's got their skills. They put a lot of forethought into this. And my dad's a big Sherlock. I've been to London a couple times. He was actually there in late 70s, early 80s when he was in college. Got books and pictures of Baker Street and things like that. Apartment that Sherlock and Dr. Watson had their business out of. So this is kind of cool, a combination of all those different things.
Anthony Gavin has a unique ability to bring people together, and soon has his crew working on casing their target, the basement vault of Lloyd's Bank at 185 Baker Street. With 500 pounds cash, inside man Reg Tucker, a used car salesman, walks into the branch and opens an account. 2 months later, in February 1971, he rents a safe deposit box, which gives him undisturbed access to the vault, as bank policy was to leave customers alone with their private items. Mickey Gervais was a former alarms technician turned criminal, and he started making some quiet inquiries about the vault's trembler sensors. Rounding things out are Thomas Stevens, who's in charge of getting all the equipment needed, Benjamin Wolfe, to lease the space of the leather goods shop Le Sac 2 doors down, and Bobby Mills as the lookout. Things are going well for the team.
So yeah, this is, they're doing their reconnaissance sort of thing, scoping it out. Some might call it social engineering in today's world, getting things ready, figuring out what information they can get easily by just asking questions. Like you said, they leave them alone when they go into their safe deposit box. Well, that's a perfect time to sketch out a drawing of what you have there, or make a map of different things, and just if there's nobody watching, there were no security cameras back then, any number of things can and did happen. I don't know what policies are now for safe deposit boxes, because I don't actually work on that stuff. One would think that they are a little more stringent and don't just let somebody into a vault by themselves for hours at a time.
Behind the wooden doors of the public entrance to the Lloyd's branch on Baker Street was a stylish lobby for a premier banking center. After requesting to access their safe deposit boxes, customers would be escorted downstairs. The round vault door weighs 5 tons and is made of bomb-proof steel. The walls around the space are 3 feet thick, steel-reinforced concrete, and the floor is 2 feet thick of the same material.
Vault design has changed a lot over the centuries, but then again, it hasn't. The processes and materials have changed, but the design and the concepts have not. The goal's simple. You got to build a box that's very difficult to damage, which would then allow entry. Older vaults were made with steel reinforced concrete, and they were basically poured on site. Today, they go with this modular concrete panels approach that use proprietary recipes of concrete and additives that result in something with the most crush resistance as possible. So when I say they're modular, I basically mean you build the vault on site with sections that were prefabricated off site. These modern recipes or formulas, whatever you want to call it, are insanely strong. I mean, compared to the older vault designs, they can be a fraction of the thickness, but even stronger. So suffice to say, whether this vault was built in the 1960s or 1860s, it's still going to be a hell of a vault. Even today, deconstruction of vaults from the 19th and early 20th century, it's not easy, even with all of our modern equipment.
A block and a half away from the world-famous 221B Baker Street address of Sherlock Holmes, Anthony Gavin's modern heist, inspired by the Red-Headed Gang, is taking place. In August of 1891, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle published The Red-Headed League, another story in the Sherlock Holmes series, and basically the Red-Headed League only allowed men with red hair to join, who were obviously criminals. They developed a scheme to break into a bank vault by tunneling under that vault, breaking up through the floor, and stealing the contents. So that's where this crew, Anthony Gavin, has gotten his inspiration from. He sees the target at Lloyd's Bank on Baker Street, a block and a half away from where Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson took up residence, and he's going to blast through the floor of that vault. That and probably a number of other influences are what really drove him to choose this particular bank as his target. Anthony Gavin chose the Lloyds on Baker Street for several reasons, but one of the most important was the time lock on the vault door. This time lock prevented anyone, including those with the combinations, to open the vault outside of preset hours. Anthony was betting that this clockwork mechanism would work to his advantage.
Time locks are vital for bank and vault security because they essentially eliminate operation outside of normal bank hours. In other words, why would you need to access the vault on a Sunday when the bank's closed? Well, that's why you set the timer. It'll block off access to anybody with a combination because they don't need to access it. Can they be defeated? Yeah, but not without substantial drilling efforts. So here's what Anthony's hoping for. Let's say they're discovered mid-burglary. What's the branch staff and police going to do about it? They can't dial the vault open and nab them. No. If they want to make entry, they're going to have to call a locksmith to come in and drill off something like the snubber bar to do so. But if you're inside, you're going to hear that. And I'd be willing to bet that if you were still inside and you heard that, you'd have enough time to empty the entire vault from the time you heard that drill till the time that the locksmith was able to swing the door. If not, you could at least get out. By operating within the time that the time lock was activated, they knew they had absolute protection for at least a short period of time. They knew that if they were discovered, they'd have enough time to get away, or at least kind of, close up what they were already in the middle of stealing. Maybe they don't have all the safe deposit boxes open, but okay, here's the 2-minute warning. Let's get out of here. That's brilliant. Absolutely brilliant.
Under the cover story of renovating the storefront area of La Sac, a space that houses a real estate agency office today, the crew begins digging a small tunnel from the basement south to the vault at Lloyd's. Thanks to measurements by Reg Tucker, they know precisely how far they have to dig. Before the gang started digging, Mickey paid a few quid to learn that their tremor sensors had been turned off because of road work. Still, Bobby Mills is on top of a building across the street keeping a lookout for any security or police. He and Anthony keep in contact using walkie-talkies.
Yeah, and you can see where their plans are coming together, to paraphrase A-Team. When you do a legitimate project, the more work you do ahead of time to plan everything out and know what you're going to do, the better it usually goes. So I guess this is no exception, except it's not a project for good use, it's a burglary. Getting a tip off or whatever that these sensors are disabled. I don't know what he had to pay the person for that information, but things like that are the lucky break sort of that you talk about in the other stories. They know when the place is and isn't open, things like that. I guess in their minds they have the best chance of getting in and getting out.
The plan all along has been to come up from the tunnel through the floor of the vault. The first option was to use a hydraulic floor jack and a pole to pressure up and break through. But the ground under the jack was soft, and with every pump, the jack sank. The gang's next option was using a thermal lance, a hot glue gun on steroids. This device pumped out steel and aluminum that was ignited by an oxyacetylene torch. But this only filled the tunnel with hot slag and toxic fumes. The tool of last resort was gelinite, similar to dynamite and made from nitrocellulose, but in a gel form. The crew packed it into the holes they had made, backed up the tunnel a bit, and hit the switch. The force of the detonation finally got them inside the vault. So as we've said, this vault was very well constructed. 3-foot thick walls, a 2-foot thick floor, all made of steel reinforced concrete. That's going to take a lot of muscle to get through. And their first option was to use basically a floor jack, a hydraulic floor jack that you would use today to lift your car up to change the tire on. They took a very strong pole, probably made out of metal, positioned it upright, and just started jacking. The problem is there was an old well or a spring underneath the floor of where they had tunneled into. So their next option was to use a thermal lance. This thing will burn hot. I mean, it puts off fumes, it puts off heat, and it's melting concrete and the steel that is inside of the concrete. That just does not create a good atmosphere because you are in a 2-foot square hole, basically. And all these fumes are pouring out, pouring back towards them. They can barely see, they can barely breathe. Even if they back into the basement of Lasac, they are still having these fumes belch out at them. And it's just making the environment so inhospitable that they finally resort to using the gelinite. It's interesting to note they were so well prepared that they had all three of these options, starting from the quietest to the loudest and most destructive. They were prepared. They didn't have to go run out to the local explosive store and buy gelinite to complete this heist. At around 2 a.m. on September 12th, amateur radio enthusiast Robert Rowlands is scanning through the bands when he picks up chatter that seems out of place.
Look, the place is filled with fumes where we was cutting. And if the security come in and smell the fumes, we are all going to take stoppo, and none of us has got nothing.
Robert calls the Marylebone police station and tells them he thinks a burglary is in progress at a local business. The Bobbies tell him to record anything else he hears and call them back later.
Yeah, so nowadays this would not be as easy to do. Pretty much all the radios are encrypted, digital, unless it was actual ham radio that somebody was using, the amateur bands, which, you know, you have to be licensed to use, but they're not, there's no sophisticated programming and things like that. With the police radios, fire and all that, you have to have very expensive radios with special software and encryption keys and things like that. Now there are websites like Broadcastify, which I listen to, where people are putting the audio feeds onto the internet so you can listen to what's going on. But police scanners that you could buy at Radio Shack for $50 back in the day to listen to what was going on, can't really do that anymore. So this guy was, probably a ham radio operator, listening to whatever channels, frequencies were going on around him. It's pretty cool that he was able to do something good, and because a lot of times it's just chatter or people doing weather. I mean, they do have their uses in emergencies, like when cell phones went out recently. All the guys were saying, yeah, but our ham radio stuff never stopped working. It's all sort of community supported. The infrastructure is not on a national level like the radios that go for the whole state. That where that's a big network. This is certainly an instance of some of the good that the people listening to the radio all the time helped out.
Gavin's crew are breaking into as many safe deposit boxes as they can. To many people, these small metal boxes are the safest places for not only valuable cash and jewelry, but also their secrets. Documents and photographs are all in these boxes too, and the thieves are seeing everything. Over the course of 30 hours, they managed to open around 268 boxes out of the nearly 1,000 and plunder them for all of their worth.
I'm going to clue you in on something. Opening safe deposit boxes is not that hard. I mean, I'm an amateur at best, and I've opened hundreds of them over the years. The trick is opening them and not damaging like the door faces or the hinges, because replacements may not be available. That person that made it may be out of business. So that's why locksmiths do it. I mean, anybody can open them, but can anybody open them to the point that they can be reused? No. That's why you call locksmiths. But when you don't care, when you're just in there to rip them open and make off with whatever's inside of them, that's easy. Because remember, the vault's providing the security. The safe deposit boxes are there to act as sort of a chain of custody. Customers aren't going in there alone, hopefully. That's what the viewing rooms are for. Branch staff goes in with them. They turn the key with the customer. They remove the bond box. They go to the viewing room. So as long as bank protocol is being followed, it's not like you need serious security on top of serious security. Running the math, though, 268 boxes in 38 hours is roughly one box for 7 minutes. Now, I don't know what lock they had on those boxes. I don't know what tools they used, but I could do that with the right tools and the right support staff, because remember, safe deposit locks are basically brass and Zamac, which is zinc, aluminum, magnesium, and copper, hence the name. They're not made of steel. They're cheap, non-secure, easy to bust apart.
After hearing more radio chatter and getting it on tape, Robert Rowlands calls Scotland Yard directly. Now convinced there is a sophisticated burglary in progress, they dispatch members of the flying squad and begin checking nearly 750 banks within an 8-mile radius. None have signs of a heist. When detectives meet up with the branch manager on the afternoon of Sunday, September 12th, they make it as far as the vault door itself. But because the door is on a time delay lock, they can't actually open the door to check and see if anything is wrong. So the time lock is performing its function. I mean, it's doing its job keeping people out of the vault after hours. And the gang is inside, and they probably were there when detectives and the branch manager were standing just outside. I mean, you can imagine the tension that would create. And the London Police Flying Squad is their elite unit that is designed to go after robberies and other high-profile crimes throughout the city. For them to be mobilized and go out and check 750 banks within an 8-mile radius within London, Westminster, that's quite a feat for them to mobilize on a weekend to go check these things. You've just got to think the crew inside of that vault knows about the flying squad. They know about the detectives, and they know that they are literally just a couple feet away, separated only by this vault door. After branch manager Guy Dark opened the vault door at 10 on Monday morning, the detectives that were with him immediately started blocking off the scene of the crime. They quickly find the gaping 16 square inch hole in the middle of the floor and have bomb techs come in to disarm any further explosives that might remain. Amongst the rubble, laid out for all to see, were several sets of photographs of prominent people. I guarantee that Monday morning, 10 a.m., that bank manager, Mr. Guy Dark, which was really his name and has been confirmed by multiple newspapers, when he opened the vault just the same as he did every other Monday morning, and there were detectives and inspectors from the police standing next to him, he opened that door, and inside was just rubble. Just chunks of concrete, wrecked safe deposit boxes, and all these pictures, his stomach dropped firmly to the seat of his pants, probably down the leg too. And just to have that shock from seeing that, I can't even imagine, because he was so confident in the time lock that nobody could get in there, and then to see somebody had been in there, and maybe that time lock had aided them. After tracing the tunnel back to the basement of Le Sac, police find a huge pile of equipment and spoil from the burglary. They catalog and examine over 800 items, but find no fingerprints or other forensic evidence.
Yeah, and they did a pretty good job of cleaning up their footprints, fingerprints as it were, even though they did leave the equipment and stuff behind. Seems like these guys knew what they were doing. They were not just amateurs. They knew how to make the scene harder for them to figure out that it was them, by probably wearing things like that, getting rid of any prints.
Inspectors from Scotland Yard immediately put a news blackout about the radio messages being intercepted, but this was lifted by the afternoon of the 13th. They announced that they were searching for 4 men and a woman, and then, in the weeks after, revealed that they were looking for an additional 5 suspects. Out of the 268 safe deposit boxes that had been broken into, Lloyd's bank gave police the names of 260 of the owners. 8 refused to cooperate, and the bank respected their wishes.
Keep in mind that not everything in a safe deposit box is money or jewels or precious metals. Anything that you can imagine that'll fit in like a 5x5 inch or a 10x10 inch bond box is what you can expect in there. Photographs, tapes, audio recordings, legal documents, wills, whatever. I mean, keep in mind, Nicole Brown Simpson. What did her safe deposit box have in it at the time of her death? Evidence of domestic violence. So, yeah, I can imagine people not wanting to attach their names to what was stolen. It's not just riches, it's often very personal possessions. Truth be told, I mean, I've got a lot of safes at my office, and my own personal safes there aren't full of money and valuables. It's stuff like birth certificates, social security cards, appraisals, valuations for various things, wills for people that are still alive. So I wouldn't want any of that out there for the media to access, and I'm not famous, I'm just a lowly locksmith. That's why Vault Protocol 101 is that you're never inside a bank vault alone. You don't open boxes alone. You don't touch the bond box once things are open. What's in there is none of your business, and you don't want any implications or accusations or associations once access is given. You do the job, you get paid, you get out of there. I can understand why certain people don't want to help the police here, because that might implicate them either on crimes or something that is, embarrassing in public.
Within weeks, inspectors had tracked down and arrested the ringleader, Anthony Gavin, the inside man, Reginald Samuel Tucker, burglar alarm specialist, Mickey Gervais, Tommy Stevens, the equipment guy, Bobby Mills, the lookout, and the cover guy, Benjamin Wolfe. All were given 12 years in prison, except for Wolfe, who was 68 years old at the time. Police were never able to identify Little Legs or TH. Out of the estimated 3 million taken, only about 231,000 pounds was ever recovered, approximately $5.1 million today. The British government has put full restrictions on all of the evidence, reports, and documents pertaining to the case, meaning nothing can be requested by the public until the year 2071. This has only added to theories about the contents and those depicted in the photographs found on the floor of the vault. The ham radio operator whose actions led police to be in the right area at the right time was initially considered for charges of listening to unlicensed transmissions, although they were never filed. As a symbol of gratitude, Robert was given a check for £2,500 by Lloyd's Bank. That's about 28,300 pounds, or about $35,700 in today's money. Executive producer is Tyler J. Thomas. Technical producer is Jeff Moss. Writer and editor is Tim Coleman.
For source materials, see our website, threetumblers.com. Get this episode and others wherever you get your podcasts.
This has been a Three Tumblers production. Copyright 2024. All rights reserved.